Yeah, now we got 6. All right. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. We have 3 bills to discuss, and we're going to start with. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. So someone had the housing. All right, that's Barry. Barry, you also have us on YouTube, which is why you have that delay. I just muted you. I'm not Barry. Okay, so we're going to start with HB 90, and HB 90 is requiring Dhcd to report to the General Assembly and the governor in reference to affirmative fair housing actions. And there are several amendments to this bill, and all of you were sent the reprint and the amendments by Matthew. And thank you, Matthew, for seeing that out. So Matthew, let's start with the amendments, Matthew, and how those amendments affect the bill.
Okay, I'm just pulling up. Everybody should be able to see the reprint now. Actually, I should verify if I'm on mute or not.
We can hear you.
And good. That's good. That works as well. Excellent. So the amendments, one thing I will note that would be included in a subcommittee recommended amendment, I would be pulling out these definitions as language where those definitions are used is striked later in the bill. So the definitions aren't used anywhere else. So there's a couple technical clarifying amendments that need to be done. Those are highlighted in yellow.
And let's clarify that a little bit more, Matthew. So the highlighted portion you're going to be deleting because it is because let me get some water. Because what, Matthew?
So that these particular definitions, assisted project, assisted unit, Maryland Accessibility Code, they're used in sections in language that would be pulled from the bill under the sponsor's amendment. So everything you're seeing here, it was an amendment recommended by the sponsor of the bill.
Okay.
And then there are other places such as here where cross-references and technical changes need to be made as a result of that. So just to give you a heads up as to what the highlighted information means. So under the bill as amended, DHCD would be required to report starting December 1, 2022 and on or before December 1 every 5 years thereafter on efforts by the state, political subdivisions, and housing authorities to promote fair housing choice and racial and economic housing integration, and any assessment of fair housing that's required under a local comprehensive plan. The report required would provide an update on actions that are being taken by local jurisdictions to affirmatively further fair housing, which becomes an element of the local comprehensive plan. And the department would work in partnership with each local jurisdiction to jointly develop and complete a template to help capture this data related to affirmatively furthering fair housing. So in the bill as introduced, there are several terms that are added to a new subtitle. These terms are pulled from a piece of guidance, a guidance document from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, from 2015. And they relate to what it means to affirmatively further fair housing. So under the Fair Housing Act, there is obviously a duty not to discriminate, but there's also a separate duty that had not been defined very clearly to take meaningful actions to take meaningful actions to combat discrimination. And so this helps provide some clear definitions of responsibilities under the Fair Housing Act. Meaningful action would mean a significant action that is designed and can be reasonably expected to achieve a material positive change by, for example, increasing fair housing choice or decreasing disparities in access to opportunity. Now, what's required of the department under the bill, the department is required to administer its programs and activities related to housing and community development to affirmatively further fair housing, look at ways to ensure collaboration with and support nonprofit and governmental entities devoted to furthering fair housing. That's an amendment by the sponsor, and may not take any action that is materially inconsistent with the obligation to affirmatively further fair housing.
Go back, please.
The department shall require political subdivisions and housing authorities to affirmatively further fair housing, and to do this would ensure that the department shall require a political subdivision or housing authority to submit a regular assessment of fair housing as part of the housing element of a comprehensive plan.
Talk about that piece for just a minute there, Matthew. Back up. And so so this is where a plan is submitted to DHCD. Is that correct?
Yes. So the local governments are required to do regular comprehensive plans, scheduled comprehensive plans. One element of the comprehensive plan is a housing element. And this bill in a later section, a couple pages down, would add in an assessment of actions taken by the county to affirmatively further fair housing.
Okay.
And this was something that was worked on, well, not just the county, any group that is submitting this comprehensive plan, any local government submitting this comprehensive plan. And I will note that the sponsor worked very closely with MML and MACO to address the concerns held by those two organizations. And my understanding at this point is that MACO and MML are in support of the bill with these amendments. So I just wanted to get that out there early. Notably, the section does not require that a political subdivision or housing authority take specific action to affirmatively further fair housing, but also wouldn't prohibit a political subdivision or housing authority from taking specific actions to affirmatively further fair housing. Mostly at this point, that the bill is largely about reporting.
Reporting, yeah, reporting only, right.
And then this is what I discussed previously. This was language that was in the bill already about local jurisdictions have a duty to affirmatively further fair housing through their housing and urban development programs. And that the housing element of a comprehensive plan that's enacted or amended on or after January 1, 2023, which would allow some time for the local jurisdictions to determine how they need to do this assessment and to work with DHCD and the Department of Planning on what is technically required. After January 1, 2023, a housing element of a comprehensive plan shall include an assessment of fair housing to ensure the local jurisdiction is affirmatively furthering fair housing.
And on this portion right here, this is where the locals are asking for assistance from DHCD. Is that correct, Matthew?
Yes. So the amendment offered by the sponsor's office includes this language right here, that on request of a local jurisdiction, the Department of Planning and the Department of Housing and Community Development shall provide technical assistance for the purpose of developing the housing element.
All right.
Of the comprehensive plan.
I just want to expand upon it. That's all. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah. Continue.
And I'll note that yesterday when this bill was being discussed, you'd heard information offered by the Department of Housing and Community Development on how they'd recommended to the sponsor that this language here be changed so that it would read, the Department of Planning in consultation with the Department of Housing and Community Development shall provide the technical assistance.
And on that point, for members of the subcommittee, that language that Matthew just talked about in consultation with is not shown here. What we're going to be asking Matthew to do is to put that in this language after our meeting here today. Continue, Matthew.
And that's largely the rest of it. There is one more change here in this uncodified section, and that would be that a local jurisdiction that completed or revised an assessment of fair housing under the Department of Housing and Urban Development's most recently published affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. The difference here is what would have been codified are the rules that were in existence as of July 16th, 2015, which ultimately were never given effect due to a change in administration at the federal level. This would allow for regular updates. If there were a new rule on affirmatively furthering fair housing, that rule, those standards under that rule would apply. They could, yeah, and that's it.
And that's that last portion there. That is so we don't have to keep coming back over and over and over again. They can just be updated. All right, now I would like to have, pardon, go ahead, Matthew.
I know, I was just saying that those relevant elements of the assessment of fair housing or analysis of impediments into the housing element would be incorporated by reference, those revised elements. So,
right.
And that's it.
Right. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is, let me get a motion and a second on the amendment so we can have a discussion, okay?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. The amendments have been moved favorable. There's a second. Now discussion on the amendments, please, ladies and gentlemen. Any discussion from the subcommittee members? Any discussion on the amendments from stakeholders?
Mr. Chairman, it's Bob Enton. I did have concerns before I saw the amendments, but I believe, and I'll ask counsel to correct me if I'm wrong, but by deleting reference to business entities, the way I read it now, the only obligation is on government agencies. There are no obligations on business entities to report this information because it's not information that a business entity would typically have. Is that correct?
There references throughout the bill to private entities. To private entities were stricken. My understanding in speaking with the sponsor's office was that wasn't originally something that was intended to be covered by the bill, and the revised bill with the amendments really is focused on the planning aspects of how
Thank you.
the planning fair housing is affirmatively furthered.
Right. So Counselor, am I correct though that the bill as before you today doesn't require business entities to do any reporting? The reporting burden is totally on government agencies.
That is correct. What's required to be reported to DHCD would be information reported by the local jurisdictions as part of their housing element in a comprehensive plan.
Okay, so at least on behalf of Maryland Bankers Association, then we don't have any problem with the bill with the amendments.
Thank you. Okay.
Could I just ask one question of the subcommittee?
Sure, go ahead.
So it is, because the amendments were adopted, it is the subcommittee's intent to adopt the recommended language. And I apologize, I just have to find it.
In consultation with?
Yes, the consultation with.
Yes, yes, because I mentioned that specifically because I wanted to make sure we included that language in consultation with. Yes, that is the intent of the subcommittee.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification.
Okay, Mr. Pickles.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to circle back on two of the other items I had brought up yesterday on the kind of discrepancy between the DHCD's initial reporting date and the implementation by local jurisdictions. The local jurisdictions, it says 2023, and DHCD's initial reporting date is 2022. So my understanding of our reporting requirement is that it's supposed to incorporate what the locals have put into their plans. I think that's clear on what's being added with the efforts by the state political subdivisions and housing authorities. And so until they have started to implement, we wouldn't necessarily have their reports or information. And so I think the consideration is either it would be a skinny report that says, we don't have access to that information, and then you start the 5-year period, or it would need to start after the locals have begun their implementation.
That seems to make sense. So let's expand upon that just a little bit, Mr. Pickles. So in order for this bill to accomplish what you're speaking about right now, right there in line 10, that date, December 1st, would have to be 2023. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, so in 2023, the locals will begin implementing the housing element, the affirmatively furthering fair housing provisions into their housing element of comprehensive plans that are starting after that date. So in 2020, and our report is intended to be a 5-year cycle. So it would probably make sense for it to start 5 years after implementation by the locals, so that we've got that information.
I don't want to push it out that far, Mr. Pickles.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't want to push it out that
Too
far.
far.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I totally appreciate what you're saying about it being a skinny report, but at this particular point, I do think that skinny is better than nothing for another 5 years.
Yeah, I agree.
but
I agree.
that's fair. So I say skinny, but if the information doesn't exist, then it wouldn't be included. But
Sure,
that's fine.
Yeah,
Well, I
and
think 2023 would make more sense then for consistency's sake anyway. Because then that at least starts to line up with the cycles.
So the locals, if I can, I want to try to clarify this now. So the locals would be sending you their information in 2023, correct?
They will start implementing, yes, the first of them, because their comprehensive plan cycles are all staggered,
Yes.
and the first of those will start in 2023.
Okay. So if yours starts in 2023 and we went back up and pushed out your report for 2023, they'd be coincident with each other. And you'd have a little bit more information in 2023 than you would in 2022. Is that correct?
That's certainly correct. I think we should, because the comprehensive plan, I understand, is due on July 1, and our plan under this our report would be due December 1.
Right.
And so that would give a few months to incorporate at least the first round of jurisdictions that are including information.
And that makes sense to me. Let me get the feel of the rest of the subcommittee. Does that make sense? Because like Mr. Pickles said, if we pushed it back to 2023 as opposed to 2022, at least they'd have a little bit of information to gather the data for the first report to be 2023. Subcommittee, give me your feedback.
I'm okay with 2023, not much further.
That's great. Delegate Healy, I
I,
appreciate it.
I agree with 2023, but I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
If this is partial information coming in dribs and drabs over a number of years, maybe for the first cycle of we should have more frequent than 5 years. Because if you're only going to get the first small group in 2023, and then you won't hear about what happened in 2024, 25, or 26 until 5 years have gone by. I'm thinking we should do more frequent than that.
So originally this bill had an annual requirement, and the sponsor took it down to 5 years.
Right.
Currently, we have a 5-year reporting cycle for some of our HUD programs as a part of the similarly named consolidated plan. So our consolidated plan goes to HUD on a 5-year cycle. The comprehensive plan is done by locals on a 10-year cycle. So the sponsor was looking at our 5-year report as essentially an update in there. And I think she had intended to reduce it, or to spread it from the annual reporting to the 5-year reporting to reduce the burden.
And that's what her that's what the bill says now is 5 years. I see you, Jen. Let me get Ann to finish up.
Just a thought, and I'd like to hear what other people have to say about it, but I'm thinking that maybe for the first 5-year cycle, we actually have some kind of interim report, maybe like 2 or 3 years in. So that we have at least a picture of how things are moving.
Okay.
But it's just a suggestion for discussion. I want to hear what the discussion is.
Delegate Teresa?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think that makes sense, like just sort of an interim, just because if they're coming in and bits, but when is your, Mr. Pickles, when is your 5-year report due on that other stuff?
We are currently in our analysis of impediments to fair housing, which is probably the closest corollary in terms of the pieces of our consolidated plan, and that'll be submitted this year.
Okay. All right. So then,
So
not to interrupt you, Mr. Pickles, that to me then makes Delegate Healy's suggestion make more sense. One in the interim. Let me have the rest of the subcommittee chime in. Because Delegate Healy is suggesting that we have one in the interim before the first 5 year is done, and then 5 years thereafter. Is that what you're suggesting, Ann?
Yes,
And if I could add one other piece
Sure.
about the
Please do.
consolidated
Please
plan.
do.
The consolidated plan is a document that we submit to HUD in order to secure funding from them. It's a part of the requirements for receiving funding.
Sure.
And so we complete our consolidated plan on behalf of what are referred to as non-entitlement jurisdictions. Those are the jurisdictions that do not receive funding directly from HUD.
Uh-huh.
And jurisdictions that do receive funding directly from HUD have their own consolidated plan reporting requirement, which is also staggered. So you'll be seeing information from those jurisdictions and from us, but you wouldn't see information necessarily from all 180 local jurisdictions.
Oh, okay. So it really wouldn't be able to compare apples to apples, is what you're saying. I see. Now based upon that though, now I'm thinking, Ann, that the report would be kind of confusing, unless we waited. I'm inclined. Go ahead,
okay.
Ann.
No, I'm fine. I'm
Okay,
fine.
thanks, Ann. I'm inclined to leave it the way it is in terms of the 5 years and just pushing the date back that 1 year.
All right.
Okay, is that okay with the subcommittee? I'm hearing no objections. Fantastic. So Matthew, if you could make that change. Thank you, sir. All right, we have a motion on the amendments and we have a second on the.
I'm sorry, the one other thing I mentioned yesterday
sorry.
was the piece requiring DHCD to require local jurisdictions and housing authorities to affirmatively further fair housing and to provide a report. And we don't regulate anyone outside of whether they are receiving assistance from us. And we're concerned that it could be a slippery slope to require us to have entities not receiving funding from us do things, especially since we don't have any enforcement capability. But I don't see any reason why it would be necessary for the department to require it. This is, after all, statute. So you could just require political subdivisions and housing authorities to take certain measures.
And, oh yeah, I recall, and I suggested yesterday that we change the shall to a may. Actually, Mr. Pickles, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave it the way it is. Yeah, I'd like to leave it the way it is, Mr. Pickles.
I think we're concerned that it could, in the future, be kind of an opening for us to then require other entities that are not receiving funding from us to take other actions.
What actions could they be forced to take?
Well, I think the doors open to just about anything, right? Because we don't have any kind of enforcement mechanism, and this is, kind of that first foray into regulation. But we're a finance agency. We provide funding, we provide loans, we provide grants, we condition, set conditions on receiving those kinds of funds. But we're not otherwise involved in the activities of any other entity.
Okay, but this doesn't force you to take action against a local jurisdiction, does it, Mr. Pickles?
No, in fact, we wouldn't be able to. It's just having us require them to do something that would then be unenforceable from our perspective, and is kind of outside of what our traditional role is.
I understand. I'm still a little leery, to be honest with you, Mr. Pickles. I still like the way it's written. I apologize for, that. But I'm still looking at leaving it the way it is as well, Mr. Pickles. I'm sorry. And let me open it up to the rest of the subcommittee. I'm only one vote. Delegate Terrasa? Yeah, you're
Leave it
okay.
as is. I think it should be left. And
Okay. Any additional comments, Mr. Pickles?
No, I think that covers it.
I
Thank
do
you.
appreciate it. Any additional comments from any of the other stakeholders or the subcommittee? That being said, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
aye.
All
Aye.
opposed say no. The ayes have it. I move the bill as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the bill as amended? Mr. Wyville? All in favor of the bill as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no.
No,
Any abstentions? One no is Mr. Wyville. The bill as amended carries. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so now, ladies and gentlemen, let's go to, that was 90. Let's go to,
The next bill with amendments to discuss would be 1239.
1239. Yes. 1239, ladies and gentlemen. And 1239, ladies and gentlemen, is a bill that's establishing an appraisal gap program with the DHCD as well. And there are several amendments on this bill. Let's start with a very small overview of the bill itself, Matthew, and then go to the amendments, please.
Certainly. So the bill, just for discussion later, the amendment I'll be speaking to is HB 1239-920-616-1. You received that amendment and a copy of the reprint earlier this morning.
As a speaker would say, amendment number 1. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the bill, as if the subcommittee were to adopt the amendments, would establish the appraisal gap from historic redlining financial assistance program and a similarly named fund within the Department of Housing and Community Development. The purpose of the program is to provide financial assistance to affordable housing developers working in low-income census tracts in order to help close what are known as appraisal gaps. An appraisal gap being the amount by which the total cost of eligible construction expenses exceeds the contract sales price of a qualified property when it is initially sold to an owner occupant. So the bill would provide financial assistance to affordable housing developers working in low-income census tracts in order to help close these appraisal gaps that occur in historically redlined neighborhoods. The amendments, I'm going to be going in order number of,
Well, hang on there for 1 second, Matthew, because I want the subcommittee to get a full understanding. So how would that work? How would you close, how would that appraisal gap be closed?
so after the rehabilitation or the construction on the current property is completed, an individual or business entity would make an application to DHCD for financial assistance to identify what the appraisal gap is and to identify what amount they might be able to recover pursuant to the program.
All right, great. And it's kind of like, ladies and gentlemen, it's kind of like historic tax credit programs. If I acquire a property that is classified as historic, in order for me to get the historic tax credits, I first have to build the property and take it back to the historic nature of it. Then I apply for the tax credits before I can receive them. That's kind of how this program works as well. All right. Now, Matthew, if you would go through the amendments, if you don't mind.
Certainly. So amendment number 1, it makes technical changes to the bill. Amendment number 2 would add acquisition costs as an eligible construction expense that could be recovered, makes conforming and clarifying changes, and requires a report on the funds deployed to census tracts with a majority racial minority population. Amendment number 3 would strike language establishing a mandated appropriation. So in the bill as introduced, there was a $4 million per year mandated appropriation that is struck from the bill. Amendment number 4 would alter the calculation of financial assistance under the program and strike the provisions requiring DHCD to approve applications for financial assistance in a certain order. Amendment number 5 would require DHCD to conduct a certain study and produce a report on the study by June 30th, 2022.
Hang on a sec, Matthew. I'm sorry, that's the last amendment anyway. That's amendment number 5.
Yes.
Go back to amendment number 1. I'm sorry, amendment number 4, Matthew, and expand upon that if you would, please.
Certainly. So let me just. Okay,
Right there.
so amendment
Yeah,
number
right
4 makes changes here to subsection B of 42803. Originally in the bill as introduced, the financial assistance that would be calculated would be equal to 35% of the appraisal gap or 80% of the national median sale price for new homes. This allows some flexibility that it would not exceed this 35% gap because the actual appraisal gap may differ. It just wouldn't require an exact basis for the financial assistance of 35% of one of these two conditions. It also, instead of using the appraisal gap, becomes 35% of the lesser of the qualified development cost or 80% of the national median sale price for new home.
And that just provides some flexibility in the calculation. So in terms of the amendments, in order to have a procedural discussion, let me get a motion favorable of the amendment in a second.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
All right, so now there's a motion and a second on the amendments. Can I get, are there any discussion on the amendments?
Yeah, I've had my hand up.
Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. I didn't see you. I'm sorry.
All right, that's fine. So if the funding mandate's removed, where does DHCD get the money?
So funds could, as in any program, funds could always be appropriated for the program, but there's not a requirement that they be appropriated for the program.
But if there's no funding available, the bill's a moot point. Is Hunter still on the call?
Yes, he is.
Yes, I am.
Can you answer that question?
Yes. Removing the mandated funding leaves it up to the governor's discretion to choose whether or not to fund it in the budget, which is generally preferable to mandated spending.
And that's exactly what the amendments have done. Is we're leaving this up to the governor's discretion, and I think that's a good idea.
So, but, so this won't be a case where next year we see the mandated funding then be placed. I mean, we've seen that with other bills, to be honest with you.
I don't want to speak to next year, Mr. Weibel. I'm trying to get through this year.
Aren't we all, brother? Aren't we all?
And I'm not sure I'm doing a good job at it either, quite frankly.
Outstanding.
Just need one more coffee.
All right, thank you, thank you.
You're definitely welcome. So we have a motion and a second on the amendments. Any additional discussion?
I have a question if you wouldn't
Sure,
mind.
please.
So I understand that it's taking it from equal to, and I apologize, I hadn't seen the reprint previously, to not to exceed the lesser of those options. I'm wondering if there was any discussion about where the rest of the gap funding would come from, because what the problem that they're seeking to address is essentially if a house is in a neighborhood where the market value is going to be 200,000, but it's going to cost 250,000 to acquire and renovate. You've got that $50,000 gap. If you're covering 35% of the costs, where does the balance come from?
Borderline communist.
Well, it's a lesser of the two. So if the developer is constructing or making this construction and he doesn't get the available funding, then it's up to the developer to fund it himself, right?
That would be my understanding of it, but
Exactly.
if the developer, this is the difference between the cost to the developer and the sale price of the home.
That's correct.
It would be setting up the developer to sell it at a loss, which they could already do. I think the intention is to close that gap so that it makes it financially viable for those homes to be rehabbed.
But they could still, we struck the word equal to, but they could still apply for up to or equal to 35% if they so desired, right?
35% of the cost.
Right. So we're still leaving it up to their discretion. That's a business decision. If
Well, right, but I think a business isn't going to choose to go in and take a loss on it, because if the qualified development cost is the, say, 50,000 between the cost of rehab and the sale price, if you're covering 35%, that leaves the developer on the hook for 65%. They would have to make it up somewhere.
Can I?
Yes. Delegate Wells. Delegate Weibel, is your hand still up for another question? I didn't want to ignore you. Okay, I'm sorry. Delegate Wells, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess, well, so to what Hunter is adding, I mean, I guess my understanding is that currently, well, my understanding of this bill is that it's intended to promote development and to be able to promote development in areas where this is the issue of that there being the assessment gap. So,
Correct.
I mean, I think that the reality of it is that, you know, we have to make improvements to kind of improve the home values so that this initiative will no longer be needed in certain areas. Perhaps it'll be needed in other areas. So I think that this is providing a little bit more of a level of confidence that there will be some additional resources that's accessible to developers that they would not otherwise have. So it could still be I guess it still doesn't minimize all the risk, but I think it kind of creates more predictability and more opportunity for there to be a tool that could close some of the risks that people are taking. And I think also it has more long-term, because we're talking about developers that do several projects probably. So I would imagine, like, if you're just going to do a one and done, this may not be the best one for you. But if you're doing several projects, you're accessing additional dollars, whether it's from the city or the state, then that's where you kind of in the medium term, you kind of close the loss. So,
I agree with you 100%, Delegate. Well, that's exactly, I agree with you 100%. Yes, yes, yes.
Maybe.
Go ahead, Mr. Pickles.
Well, I think that gets to my understanding of where it's trying to go, but I don't think 35% does that. And maybe it's a misunderstanding of what the qualified development cost is. So if the qualified development cost is the total cost of the property, including acquisition and rehab, then I think 35% certainly gets to that gap between sale price and the acquisition rehab. But if the qualified development cost is the delta between the sale price and the actual costs, I don't think that this would necessarily do anything to get a developer to be able to close that gap. I think for it to work practically, you would have to figure out how to make up the difference between the developer's costs and the sale price.
So
I'm
sorry.
And I think Delegate Wells is correct when she says that you target a few and then it essentially resets the market so that the market forces start working. But when you go in, say you're going to do 10 houses in a block or a 2-block area, the first 2, 3, 5 houses that you do, they're going to be based on comps that have a significantly lower value. So you're not going to be, there's going to be a bigger difference between what it can sell for and what the actual cost is.
Right.
And for that matter, what the lenders would be able to underwrite a loan for. So they're going to come in with their appraisal, and their appraisal might even be below the sale price.
Mm-hmm. And then you build your value as you continue the neighborhood.
Right. You build out value and equity in the neighborhood, but you have to get the ball rolling. And
That's correct.
That's with the developer. And I don't think that 35% is getting to the actual development costs. But
I've got a few questions, but hang on, let me ask I've got Wyville and then back to Wells. Matthew, in terms of the amendment that struck equal to, where did that originate from?
This was a sponsor amendment. My understanding is there are that this amendment was also to be included in the cross file in the Senate so that the bills would be identical. Looking at this use of qualified development cost, I'm almost wondering if it was a drafting issue and it meant to refer back to eligible construction expenses, which would be get to the total costs of, would get to what it costs to actually rehabilitate the property or to build out the property, and then relate back to the this idea of the appraisal gap. So the difference between the eligible construction expenses and the contract sales price of a qualified property when it is initially sold to an owner occupant, because I don't see a definition of qualified development cost in the bill.
If that were the case, that would make more sense, because then you're talking about, in my hypothetical example, you're talking about 35% of the 250 in acquisition rehab costs, not the 35% of the actual delta between the sale and the acquisition rehab costs. And so you could the difference between the sales price and the acquisition rehab would likely be less than that 35% that they're talking about.
And I think there may be some, I think that may be a very important point, because I will note that the language that was struck here is 35% of the appraisal gap, and the appraisal gap is the delta. So they meant there was an intent clearly to change from the delta between the development costs versus the sale costs. And I think perhaps there might be that really what was intended here is eligible construction expenses, and not this
gap.
Well, not this idea of qualified development cost. That might be something that would be worth following up on.
I think that makes sense. I want to get this right. Right now, we've got questions from, in this order, Wells, Terrassa, and then Healy.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry. Hang on. We got Wells, Wyville, Terrassa, and Healy.
There we go. Okay.
All right, is that my invitation, Mr. Chair?
You're invited.
Okay, thank you. So it's my understanding that the 35% is an amendment that was provided by the sponsor. The sponsor,
Yes.
and also specifically not by just by the sponsor, but this was done with input from developers, and it was an amendment that the developers also supported. So I think.
And if I can cut you off,
Go ahead.
And I think that this language is also consistent with the Senate bill.
Yes, I think that's my understanding as well. So.
Right. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I forgive you. You just have to go for me next year. It's all right. No, but I just wanted to add that this is done. I think to what Hunter is saying, I mean, we're really talking about a subsect of developers, and we're really talking about like targeting specific communities. So in terms of the gap, you know, they've said that this would be assistance that would help them be able to do more development. And I'm aware that they also are using other resources. So I don't really think there's this fundamental kind of, I don't think there's an issue of this program won't be helping close their risk or close any of the funding challenges that they currently face. It will actually do that.
Therefore, your suggestion is to leave it the way it is. Is that correct, Delegate Wells?
Yes, I mean, I would like to move this bill, but I know there's other questions behind me, so I will.
Delegate Wyville, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to try to understand this simplistically, I buy a house for 50, I put 50 in it. I have 100,000 invested. I sell it for 75. The taxpayer is going to pick up the tab of 35% of that $25,000 loss for me.
I don't think so. I'm glad you asked that.
Hunter?
So
It's different between
essentially,
what I have invested in the property and the sale price, right?
yes. So you are essentially correct. I think the intention of this bill is to take basically that same idea that you just described and apply it to areas where housing market forces are not working, basically, where because construction costs are somewhat finite regardless of the value of the property, and some housing markets are depressed. And so by on kind of an initial basis, subsidizing some of that cost of improving the quality of several homes in a targeted area, it sort of resets the market to increase the values to a point where you've now got comps and the sale price is high enough to support the development costs in the future. It's essentially trying to fix a failed market, but you're right. The first several houses that you're doing in a targeted area, you are trying to subsidize that gap between what the home can sell for and what the actual cost to fix it up is.
And this is new construction or rehabilitation?
This bill would allow for new construction, I think, but in general, it's rehabilitation. We're usually talking about older communities that have seen a lot of disinvestment.
So the term in the bill's title, historic, has nothing to do with the age of the structure. That's referring to something else?
Correct. I think what they're trying to talk about is areas that had redlining in the past, not referring to the structure itself.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Wyville. Spoken like a true bean counter. I knew I could always count on you. Delegate Terrassa, you're next.
I was just going to say, I think we should vote it. I mean, I don't know why there was no objection to this bill. I think we should move forward with it.
I understand.
I would be hesitant to change stuff up unless we want to get the sponsor on here to clarify things, but I think we're okay.
I'm just trying to go through the process. You know, we have a process. I'm a
Thank
process
you.
guy. I'm just an engineer.
Thank you.
I agree with you, Marvin. Gotta get through the process.
Gotta go through the process. All right, Delegate Healy.
Yeah, and I'm a process person too. I want to understand a little bit more about this. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me that redlining corrupted the market in the first place. So this is a correction of the things that were done in the past, and it makes sense to create a way to undo that and make a healthier marketplace. My question about how this bill works, I have been thoroughly confused by the back and forth about, and Delegate Weibel's description. That sounds to me like we're talking about what was called a delta between the two, rather than helping to make the difference between the costs and the actual. But we don't want them to be creating totally out of line housing, like turning like decrepit place into a McMansion, and then it's way out of line, and it won't really, it'll make, if it's successful, it will make the whole neighborhood unaffordable for anybody except the very wealthy. We don't want that to happen either.
Right, and there's a couple of things that would prohibit that on a normal basis, in that developers, as a normal course of events, you're going to try to get, you would never be able to sell that kind of place. It would just sit there. All
right. All right.
So
I'm fine.
Okay, good. We have a motion and a second on the amendments. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. We have a bill before us. May I have a motion? I'm making a motion in favor of the bill as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion on the bill as amended? All in favor of the bill as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No.
Weibel is now the new Dr. No. Weibel, just kidding.
I just don't think the taxpayer should be in the business of guaranteeing the delta between the sale price and the, that's the free market. I understand could be some depressed areas that might need some sort of assistance, but.
I see. I truly was only joking, Bill. You know that.
No, I just wanted to explain my vote. Thank you.
I got you. So the bill passes, HB 1239 passes as amended. It is now 1:27, ladies and gentlemen. We have to be in committee in 3 minutes. I appreciate all of your input, and I will send you a text message if we're going to have another meeting at 3:30. Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen. I shall see you soon. One way or t'other.
Marvin.